The first drops hit Marcus Chin's face like tiny ice bullets, and he knew he was in serious trouble. What had started as a peaceful solo backpacking trip through the Cascade Mountains was rapidly turning into a nightmare. The weather app on his phone had promised light afternoon showers, but the sky above looked like something out of an apocalypse movie dark. Churning clouds that seemed to be racing toward him with malicious intent. Marcus pulled his rain jacket tighter and quickened his pace along the narrow mountain trail. He'd been hiking for 5 days now, trying to clear his head after losing his software engineering job 3 weeks ago. The layoffs had hit his entire team, and at 28, he felt completely lost about what to do next with his life. His friends had suggested this solo trip might help him find some clarity. But right now, all he could think about was finding shelter. The gentle patter of rain quickly escalated into a torrential downpour. Within minutes, Marcus could barely see. 10 feet ahead of him, the trail became a muddy river, and every step was a careful calculation to avoid slipping down the mountainside. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very rocks beneath his feet. This wasn't the peaceful mountain shower he'd planned for, this was a full-blown storm. Marcus tried to stay calm, drawing on his years of hiking experience. He'd weathered storms before, but never anything quite this intense. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing, bending them at impossible angles. His backpack felt heavier with each step as the rain soaked through every layer of his gear. He could feel water seeping into his boots, and his fingers were going numb despite his waterproof gloves. Then disaster struck. A massive gust of wind, stronger than anything he'd experienced, slammed into him from the side. Marcus heard a sickening crack and watched in horror as a dead tree branch crashed down directly onto his backpack. When he managed to wrestle free from the debris, his heart sank. The branch had torn a gaping hole right through the middle of his tent, rendering it completely useless. Now he was truly in danger. Night was falling fast, the temperature was dropping, and he was soaking wet. With no shelter, Marcus knew the basics of wilderness survival. Staying warm and dry were the most critical factors. But both seemed impossible now. His mind began to race through options, none of them good. He could try to fashion some kind of lean-to with his tarp, but in this wind, it would be blown away in minutes. He could keep walking, hoping to find some kind of natural shelter, but he was already exhausted, and his thinking was becoming foggy. Dangerous sign of hypothermia setting in. That's when he saw a faint, warm glow filtering through the trees about 50 yards off the main trail. At first, Marcus thought his oxygen-deprived brain might be playing tricks on him. But as he stumbled closer, he realized it was real. Someone had set up camp in a perfect spot between 2 large granite boulders that provided natural windbreaks. Their tent glowed softly from within, looking like a beacon of hope in the chaos of the storm. Marcus stood there for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, weighing his options. He knew he should call out, announce his presence, ask for help properly. But the cold was affecting his judgment now, making his thoughts slow and desperate. All he could focus on was getting out of this storm before it killed him. The tent was quiet. Whoever was inside seemed to be sleeping peacefully, unaware of his presence, making what he knew was probably the worst decision of his life. Marcus quietly unzipped the outer vestibule of the stranger's tent. The small space wasn't much, barely big enough for gear storage, but it was dry and blocked the howling wind. He crawled inside, zipped the entrance behind him, and immediately felt the relief of being out of the storm. His whole body was shaking from cold and exhaustion. Despite knowing he should wake the tent's owner and explain himself, sleep overtook him almost instantly. As Marcus drifted off in that small vestibule, soaking wet and shivering, he had no idea that his life was about to change completely. He had no idea that the person sleeping just a few feet away would become the most important person in his world. All he knew was that he was finally safe, and for now, that was enough. Little did he know that his mysterious host had been awake for the last 10 minutes, listening to every sound he made, and deciding whether or not to trust this desperate stranger who had stumbled into her sanctuary. Riley Thompson had been awake since the moment she heard the first quiet footstep outside her tent. As an emergency room nurse at Seattle General, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was wrong, even in her sleep. The storm had woken her initially. The wind was fierce enough to make even her well-secured tent shudder, but it was the sound of someone moving around outside that had put all her senses on high alert. She lay perfectly still in her sleeping bag, listening intently as whoever it was approached her campsite. Riley's hand instinctively moved to the bear spray clipped to the inside of her tent. But something about the sounds made her pause. The footsteps were unsteady, almost stumbling. There was no stealth to them, no sense of predatory intent. Sounded like someone in trouble. When she heard the quiet zip of her tent's outer vestibule, Riley's heart rate spiked. She waited, barely breathing, as the intruder settled into the small space. Within minutes, she could hear exhausted, shivering breathing that gradually slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Whoever this was, they were clearly in bad shape and now. They were unconscious just a few feet away from her. Riley spent the rest of the night in a strange state of half-sleep, aware of every sound her unexpected guest made. She heard him mumbling in his sleep, caught fragments of words about deadlines and server crashes. Tech industry, jargon that made her think he was probably some kind of programmer or engineer. Once, around 3 in the morning, he said quite clearly, "I'm sorry, I know this is wrong," which actually made her smile a little in the darkness. When dawn finally broke, Riley made her decision. She could hear him stirring in the vestibule, probably waking up confused and embarrassed. She quietly started her camp stove and began making coffee, letting the familiar sounds announce that she was awake and aware of his presence. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully, as if finding strangers in her tent was a perfectly normal occurrence.
"I hope you like coffee because I'm making enough for two." The silence from the vestibule was deafening. Riley could practically feel the panic
radiating from her uninvited guest. "I know you're awake," she continued, unable to keep the amusement out of her voice. "And before you start apologizing profusely, let me just say that you talk in your sleep. Something about debug protocols. Were you dreaming about me, or were you coding in your dreams?" She heard a groan, followed by the sound of someone sitting up too quickly and hitting their head on the tent ceiling. "Oh God," came a male voice, thick with embarrassment. "I am so sorry. I know this looks terrible. I know you must think I'm some kind of creep or criminal, but I swear I'm not. My tent got destroyed in the storm, and I was hypothermic, and I saw your light. I made a really stupid decision." "And breathe," Riley interrupted, laughing. "You're going to hyperventilate, and trust me, that's not fun at this altitude." She unzipped the inner door of her tent and poked her head into the vestibule. "Hi there, I'm Riley." The man staring back at her looked absolutely mortified. He was probably around her age, with dark hair that was still damp from the storm and kind brown eyes that were currently wide with panic. His clothes were rumpled and still slightly wet, and there was a tear in his jacket that looked fresh. "Marcus," he managed to say. "Marcus Chen, and I really am incredibly sorry about this. I was going to explain everything when I woke up, but I fell asleep before I could." "Marcus," Riley said, settling cross-legged in the tent opening. "Let me tell you something. I've been a nurse for 4 years. I've seen people make all kinds of decisions when they're scared, hurt, or desperate. And honestly, the fact that you only came into my vestibule, that you didn't try to wake me up or bother me, and that you're this upset about it, tells me everything I need to know about your character." She handed him a steaming mug of coffee. "Plus you were clearly in real trouble last night. That storm was no joke, and if your shelter was compromised, ... double quotes." She shrugged. "I probably would have done the same thing." Marcus took the coffee with shaking hands, and Riley noticed he was still shivering slightly. "You're still cold," she observed, "and probably haven't eaten anything decent." "Lucky for you, I always pack way too much food." She disappeared back into her tent and emerged with a bag of trail mix and some energy bars. "Tell me what happened." As Marcus recounted his story, the job loss, the solo hiking trip, the storm, the tree branch that destroyed his tent, Riley found herself genuinely impressed by his honesty and his obvious outdoor experience. He wasn't some city guy who had wandered into the wilderness unprepared. He'd just had incredibly bad luck. "So what's your plan now?" she asked when he finished. "I mean, you can't hike without a tent." Marcus looked dejected. "I guess I'll have to hike out to the nearest road and figure out how to get home. So much for my big journey of self-discovery." He gave her a rueful smile. "Though I have to say, this has been pretty educational. I've learned that I make terrible decisions when I'm scared and that some people are incredibly kind to strangers who probably don't deserve it." Riley studied his face for a moment. There was something genuinely appealing about Marcus Chennault, just his obvious gratitude and embarrassment, but something deeper, sincerity that was rare in her experience. "Well," she said finally, "happen to know there's an outfitter in the next trail town, about 15 miles south. They rent gear to thru hikers. If you're really committed to this journey of self-discovery, you don't have to give up yet." Marcus looked up at her with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You think I should continue?" "I think," Riley said, standing up and starting to pack her gear, "that people don't usually end up in situations like this unless the universe is trying to tell them something. And I think giving up on yourself after one bad night would be a real shame." As they broke camp together and prepared to head in opposite directions on the trail, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that this strange encounter was going to be more significant than either of them realized. 3 days after their unexpected meeting, Marcus was setting up his newly rented tent at a campsite near Crystal Lake when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message was simple. "Hey, stranger. Just wanted to make sure you made it too. The outfitter, okay? Hope the new tent doesn't have any uninvited guests. Your temporary host, Riley." X found himself grinning as he typed back. "Tent is secure and guest-free, thanks to you. Currently camped by a beautiful lake, wishing I could share the view with the person who made it possible." He attached a photo of the sunset reflecting off the crystal-clear water, then hesitated before hitting send. Is that too forward? They'd only spent a few hours together, and under pretty unusual circumstances, but something about Riley had stuck with him over the past few days. Her unexpected kindness, her easy humor, the way she'd made him feel like less of a disaster, even in his most embarrassing moment, before he could second-guess himself. He sent the message. Riley was just finishing her shift at Seattle General, exhausted from a particularly brutal 12 hours in the emergency department, when her phone chimed. The sunset photo made her pause in the hospital parking lot. It was genuinely beautiful, but more than that, Marcus had said he wished he could share it with her. Something about that simple sentiment made her heart skip a little. "Gorgeous view," she texted back. "Though I have to admit, my current scenery isn't quite as inspiring." She took a picture of the hospital's concrete parking garage and added, "The glamorous life of an ER nurse." That single exchange opened the floodgates. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and Riley began texting regularly. What started as simple check-ins evolved into deeper conversations that lasted well into their respective evenings. Marcus would send photos from the Trela family of deer drinking from a stream, a particularly challenging switchback, his camp stove dinner that he'd managed not to burn. Riley would respond with stories from the hospital, pictures of her weekend hikes around Seattle, and her own attempts at outdoor cooking on her days off. Marcus found himself looking forward to Riley's messages more than anything else in his day. She had a way of seeing humor in even the most stressful situations, and her perspective on life was both grounded and optimistic. When he told her about his struggles with finding direction after losing his job, she didn't offer empty platitudes or simple solutions. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that helped him think through what he really wanted. "What did you love about programming before it became just a job?" she asked one evening. "I mean, what got you excited about it in the first place?" Marcus had to think about that for a long time. Eventually, he wrote back, "I loved building things that could help people solve problems. My favorite project was this app that helps small nonprofits manage their volunteer scheduling. It wasn't glamorous, but knowing it made a real difference felt amazing." "So maybe the problem isn't that you're done with tech," Riley responded. "Maybe you just need to find a way to use those skills for something that matters to you." Riley was having her own revelations through their conversations. Marcus had a way of asking about her work that went beyond the usual "how was your day" questions. He wanted to know what cases challenged her, What moments made her feel like she was making a real difference? What parts of nursing she wished were different? "I've been thinking about travel nursing," she admitted to him one evening. "There's this program where you take temporary assignments in different places or all hospitals, disaster relief places that really need experienced staff. I've always wanted to try it, but it seems scary to give up the security of a permanent job." "What's the scariest part?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, that I might love it too much to come back to my comfortable life here? That I might discover I've been playing it safe when I could have been having adventures? Would that be such a terrible thing to discover?" he wrote back. Their conversations weren't all deep and philosophical. Marcus learned that Riley was obsessed with true crime podcasts, that she'd once gotten food poisoning from her own cooking and had to treat herself in the and that she had strong opinions about the correct way to pack a backpack. Riley discovered that Marcus was surprisingly knowledgeable about wildflowers, that he'd read every book in his local library's science fiction section by age 16, and that he could do surprisingly good impressions of various Star Trek characters. 2 weeks into their digital friendship, Riley made a decision that surprised even her. She was scrolling through Marcus's recent messages, looking at pictures from his approach to Mount Rainier. When she realized something, she missed him. Not just their conversations, but him specifically. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, his self-deprecating humor about his wilderness mishaps, the genuine gratitude he'd shown for her help. On impulse, she pulled up a map of his hiking route and found that he'd be passing through the small town of Glacier Falls in 3 days. It was a 4-hour drive from Seattle, but she had a long weekend coming up. So she texted him, "I know this might be crazy, but I've been thinking about visiting Glacier Falls. I hear they have excellent pie at the local diner. Any chance? A certain thru-hiker might be in the area this weekend." Marcus's phone was in his backpack when the message arrived. When he finally saw it during his afternoon break, he read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't imagining things. Then he called her immediately. "Are you serious?" asked the moment she answered. "Completely serious," Riley said, though he could hear the nervous excitement in her voice. "Unless you think it would be weird. I know we just met, and under pretty unusual circumstances, Riley," Marcus interrupted. "This is the best news I've gotten in months. I can't wait to see you." As he hung up the phone and continued hiking toward Glacier Falls, Marcus realized that his journey of self-discovery was taking some unexpected turns. But for the first time in a long time, he was excited to see where the path would lead. Glacier Falls was the kind of place that existed primarily to serve thru-hikers and weekend adventurers, a tiny mountain town with exactly 1 main street, 1 diner, 1 general store, and 1 motel. Marcus arrived on Friday afternoon, dusty and tired from a challenging 15-mile hike, but buzzing with nervous energy about seeing Riley again. He checked into the motel, took his first real shower in a week, and put on the cleanest clothes he had, which admittedly wasn't saying much. By 6 o'clock, he was sitting in a corner booth at Mountain View Diner, trying not to watch the door too, obviously, while pretending to study the menu he'd already memorized. When Riley finally walked in, Marcus felt his heart do something complicated. In his chest. She looked even better than he remembered. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, instead of in the practical ponytail she'd worn while camping. And she was wearing a green dress that brought out her eyes, but it was her smile, that same warm, slightly mischievous smile from their first morning together, that made him remember why he'd been thinking about her constantly. "Clean up nice," Riley said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Though, I have to say I was kind of expecting the full mountain man look by now. I figured I should at least attempt to look civilized for dinner," Marcus replied. "Though I make no promises about my table manners after 2 weeks of eating with a camping spoon." They fell into conversation as easily as they had that morning, in her tent, and Marcus marveled at how natural it felt to be with her. Riley told him about the drive up from Seattle, how she'd gotten lost twice because she'd been distracted by the mountain views. Marcus shared stories from the trail, including a mishap with a particularly aggressive squirrel that had stolen half his lunch. "So," Riley said over dessert, "the pie was indeed excellent. How's the journey of self-discovery going? Any major epiphanies?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Talking to you over these past few weeks has helped me realize something important. I don't think I want to go back to corporate tech. I keep thinking about what you said about using my skills for something that matters. Oh, what are you thinking? There are all these non-profit organizations that work with wilderness programs, outdoor education for kids, wilderness therapy, environmental conservation groups. They need people who understand both technology and the outdoors. I've been researching some opportunities, and there's actually a lot out there. Riley's face lit up. Marcus, that's amazing. That sounds perfect for you. What about you? He asked. Any decisions about the travel nursing thing? Riley grinned and pulled an envelope from her purse. Funny you should ask. I actually applied. For the program this week, this is my acceptance letter. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Riley, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you for taking that leap. The touch of his hand on hers sent a little thrill through Riley that she tried to ignore. I was inspired by someone I know who left his comfortable life to go find himself in the mountains. They spent the weekend exploring Glacier Falls together, which took approximately 2 hours since there wasn't much to explore. But they made the most of it, hiking to a nearby waterfall, browsing the general store's surprisingly extensive collection of local crafts, and talking for hours over coffee at the diner. Marcus showed Riley some of his favorite wildflowers, explaining their names and properties with an enthusiasm that she found absolutely charming. Riley taught Marcus some basic wilderness first aid techniques, including how to properly clean and dress wounds in the backcountry. Saturday night, they sat on the motel's small porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. The conversation had grown quieter, more personal, as the weekend progressed. Can I tell you something? Riley said, turning to face him. When I woke up that morning and found you in my tent, I wasn't actually as surprised as I let on. Been awake for a while listening to you outside. I could have said something earlier. Could have asked what you were doing there. Why didn't you? Marcus asked softly. Because you sounded so desperate, so exhausted. And honestly, there was something about the whole situation that felt, significant somehow, like it was supposed to happen. Marcus nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. What are the odds? Of all the campsites and all the mountains, I stumble into yours. And of all the people who could have found a stranger in their tent, you found someone who thought it was more funny than terrifying. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both aware that the weekend was almost over and they'd have to say goodbye again. But this goodbye felt different from their first parting. This time they both knew with certainty that whatever was happening between them was real and worth pursuing. I'll be in Colorado for my first travel assignment, Riley said eventually. Starting in about 6 weeks. Colorado's beautiful, Marcus replied. Great hiking. I was hoping you might think so. She turned to meet his eyes. Maybe when you're ready to take a break from your wilderness adventure, you could come visit. If you want to. Marcus leaned closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Riley Thompson, he said quietly, I would love nothing more than to visit you in Colorado. When he kissed her under those brilliant mountain stars, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at the same time. And as they held each other on that small-town motel porch, both of them knew that their lives had just taken another, unexpected turn, one that would lead them exactly where they were meant to be. 2 years later, stood at the edge of the same granite boulders where he'd first seen Riley's tent glowing in the storm. But everything about this moment was different. The desperate hypothermic man who had stumbled through that tempest was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly where he belonged and what he wanted from life. The transformation in both their lives had been remarkable. Marcus had found his true calling working for Wilderness Connections, a nonprofit organization that used outdoor adventures to help troubled teenagers find direction and confidence. His days were spent teaching kids from challenging backgrounds how to navigate both mountain trails and life's obstacles. His programming background had proven invaluable, helping the organization develop apps that tracked participant progress and connected alumni with mentorship opportunities. For the first time in his career, Marcus went to work every day knowing he was making a real difference. Riley had completed her travel nursing program with assignments that took her from rural Alaska to hurricane-damaged areas of the Gulf Coast. Each placement had taught her something new about resilience, community, and the healing power of compassionate care. She'd recently accepted a permanent position as the director of emergency medicine at a mountain hospital in Colorado, where she was developing innovative wilderness rescue protocols that were being studied by medical programs nationwide. Their relationship had weathered the challenges of distance, unpredictable schedules, and the constant uncertainty that came with Riley's traveling assignments. But every reunion had felt like coming home, and every separation had only reinforced how much they meant to each other. Marcus had visited Riley during every assignment, and she had spent her time off exploring Colorado's wilderness with him. Now, as golden autumn light filtered through the changing aspen leaves, they had returned to their beginning for what Riley thought was just a nostalgic camping trip. She was arranging their dinner supplies on the same flat rock where she'd first offered Marcus his coffee, completely unaware that this evening would change everything. "I can't believe it's been 2 years," Riley said, looking around at the familiar campsite. "Remember how mortified you were that first morning?" Marcus grinned as he adjusted the logs in their fire pit. "I'm pretty sure I apologized about 17 times in the first 5 minutes. You probably thought I was completely unhinged, actually. I thought you were kind of sweet. Terrified and half frozen, but sweet." She paused, watching him work. "You know what's funny? I've stayed in probably 50 different places over the past 2 years, but this spot still feels more like home than anywhere else." "That's interesting you should say that," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness that Riley didn't quite catch. "I've been thinking a lot about the concept of home lately, as the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks." They prepared dinner together with the easy coordination of people who had shared countless meals in countless locations. Riley told Marcus about her new position, her excitement about finally settling down in one place, her plans to establish a wilderness medicine training center at the hospital. Marcus listened intently, but Riley noticed he seemed distracted, checking his watch and glancing around their campsite as if expecting something. "Everything okay?" she asked as they sat down to eat. "Seem a little jumpy tonight." "Just thinking about how much has changed since we were here last," Marcus said, taking her hand across their makeshift table. 2 years ago, we were both figuring out what we wanted to do with our lives. Now look at us." "Now look at us," Riley agreed, squeezing his fingers. "Though I have to say I never imagined when I found you shivering in my vestibule that you'd end up being the love of my life." Marcus's heart started racing. This was the opening he'd been waiting for. "Funny you should mention that," he said, standing up suddenly. "Because finding you changed everything for me, too. Not just my career or my direction in life, but my understanding of what it means to be truly happy." Riley watched in growing amazement as Marcus dropped to one knee beside their campfire, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Riley Thompson," he began, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. 2 years ago, I stumbled into your life during the worst storm I'd ever experienced. I was lost in every possible way, professionally, personally, spiritually. I made what I thought was the worst decision of my life when I crawled into your tent." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring with a center stone that seemed to capture and reflect the firelight like a tiny star. That terrible decision led me to the most extraordinary person I've ever known. You didn't just give me shelter from the storm. You showed me what it means to lead with compassion, to find humor in difficult situations, and to take chances on people who might not deserve them. Riley's eyes filled with tears as Marcus continued. "I love your strength, your adventurous spirit, your ability to make anywhere feel like home just by being there. I love how you've supported my dreams while pursuing your own, how you've made our long-distance relationship feel like an adventure instead of a hardship." Marcus took a deep breath, his voice growing stronger. "This place will always be special to us because it's where our story began. So I want it to be where our next chapter starts too. Riley, will you marry me? Will you let me be your home, the way you've been mine?" "Yes," Riley whispered, then laughed through her tears. "Yes, absolutely. Yes." As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, Riley threw her arms around his neck. and they held each other as tightly as they had that first morning when she'd helped a stranger become the most important person in her world. "I have something to tell you too," Riley said when they finally separated. "I already put in my request to transfer some of my vacation days. I want to spend 3 weeks helping you with the summer wilderness program, if you'll have me." "Are you kidding?" Marcus said, spinning her around. "Having you there would make it perfect." Later that night, as they lay in Marcus's tent, properly invited, this time and listened to the gentle sounds of the mountain night, Riley marveled at how perfectly their lives had aligned. Tomorrow they would start planning a wedding, combining their careers in service to others, and building a life together in the Colorado mountains they both loved. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, together, engaged, in a place where a terrible storm had brought them the greatest gift of their lives.